From the CyberHub bunker and studio, you're tuning in to the CyberHub Podcast. And now for your host and CISO, James Azar.
Good morning, security gang. Welcome to another episode of the CyberHub Podcast, Monday, December 9th, 2024. A packed show for all of y'all today. So thanks so much for tuning in. But before I kind of get started on the show this morning, I've gotten a lot of questions over the weekend from a lot of listeners and viewers of the show about kind of what happened in Syria over the weekend, the essentially almost deathless toppling of a dictator in Syria, the mass murderer Bashar al-Assad and his regime that's waged war and killed over 600,000 Syrians that we know of, although I'm sure as time goes on, the atrocities will continue to light to the fact that there were over 1 million Syrians killed by the Bashar al-Assad dictatorship over the last about 14 years or so. But the reason I say that early on in the show is because Bashar al-Assad was backed by Russia and Iran, who are so preoccupied that they've left the void. Now, what does that mean for cyber, which was kind of the main question I got from several viewers and listeners over the weekend is this. Iran is weakened. Their entire multi-billion-dollar project of surrounding Israel with their proxies from Syria to Lebanon to Gaza and everywhere else has pretty much fallen apart in the last 14 months since October 7th. And I believe that the only thing they still have going for them is cyber. I don't expect cyber to go away. I, in fact, expect that Iran will look to be more disruptive now through cyber activities rather than paramilitary and terrorist activities. Just keep an eye for that. Russia on their end is going to remain to be Russia. Their cyber force is separated from their fighting force. Russia kind of said, we're done with al-Assad. We'll give you refuge in Russia for you and your family, and that's about that. And so just keep an eye out for that. I don't see Iran's cyber activities going away anytime soon. And now, without further ado, let's go ahead and kick off this morning's show with a coffee cup cheers. My double espresso coffee cup cheers, y'all. Let's go ahead and get started on this morning's show with what's going on in Romania. So Romania, a member of the European Union, has had to essentially recall their election and saying we're going to do it all over again. The reason for that is a recent and declassified report from Romania's intelligence services saying that the country's election infrastructure was targeted by more than 85,000 cyber attacks. Threat actors were also able to obtain access credentials for election-related websites. They leaked them on a Russian hacker forum less than a week before the first round of presidential elections. So for those who don't know, in Romania, the way in most of Europe, by the way, the way elections work is if you don't get a majority vote, not like 48% and the other person gets 45, you got to get 50 plus 1. And if you don't get 50 plus 1 in the election, then it goes to a runoff. So that's kind of like the top two contenders. So typically there's more than two contenders. I know in the US, we're not used to that. Really, I mean, there were 4 or 5 different names on the ballot, but really 2 big ones, the Democratic and Republican contenders in the US just last month. But in Europe and in most of the places, they've got 10, 12 different parties all run a candidate. So some get 5%, some get 10%. But at the end of the day, the top 2 candidates go into what they call a runoff election. That's the second election in Georgia. We do that here for governor and Senate seats. You got to get 50 plus 1 in order to win the election. So just an FYI there. So Romanian intelligence services say that on November 19th, the IT infrastructure of the Permanent Electoral Authority was the target of a cyber attack. This cyber attack follows an incident where credentials were compromised, including bec.ro, that's the Romanian subdomain, rope.ro, and registarelectoral.ro. The voter registrations were all leaked on Russian cybercrime forums. The attackers obtained logins by either targeting legitimate users or exploiting vulnerabilities in the training server for operators at voting sections. The Romanian intelligence agency says 85,000 attacks continued until November 25th, the night after the first presidential election. The goal ranged from gaining access to infrastructure to compromising and altering election information for the public or denying access to the systems. Now, primarily, there's no proof anywhere here that the Russians were able to manipulate the votes. But this election in Romania is highly, highly contested, with kind of an out of the blue guy with the name of Georgescu, not Ceausescu, who was the Romanian dictator that was executed after his toppling as well, if we're talking about toppling dictators today. But Georgescu. So Georgescu is kind of this out of the box, not within the political realm kind of coming, and he really did win that first round of the election. And now there's a constitutional crisis because the way this works in Romania, there's a constitutional court. That constitutional court reviews this. The constitutional court reversed this and said, we're going to do it all over again, essentially is what they said. So they have all kinds of different kind of influencing campaigns going on from what they say to be Russian. Again, they're saying this is Russian activity to promote Georgescu, who's kind of not anti-EU, but more of like, we need to find a way to get along with the Russians, and that obviously doesn't fit well. They call him a pro-Russian presidential candidate, but again, I've read some of his stuff. I don't think he's pro-Russian. I just think the EU is not what it used to be, and I think a lot of people in the EU see the corruption in the EU and are looking for alternatives or to be less dependent on the EU going forward. And Romania, for their end, by the way, they're still on their own currency. They haven't adopted the euro as a currency, so they still have some financial freedom, but there's immigration limits on Romanian going through. I've spent time in Romania. I understand the dynamics of Romania, so I say this kind of not from someone who's read a book, but someone who's spent a lot of time in Romania. The situation there is the Romanians have never flourished under the EU. In fact, they're limited into where they can live. Most places won't let Romanians, even in the European Union, get job benefits if they're in a different country. It takes a long time. It's very, 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 very problematic. And so it's easy to see how the existing political class is actually losing this. Nonetheless, the Russian disinformation campaign is now bringing this election to a whole new start. They're resetting it. First time that I can think of in modern democratic history that we see an election being canceled, the results of an election being canceled, and a new election that has not yet been declared being redone with the hopes of what? That there will be less foreign interference. Can you stop foreign interference on social media? Can you force these companies to do that? I don't think you can, because none of these companies really have a Romanian operation. So the leverage Romania has against a TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and X doesn't really exist. So we'll see what happens there. Something really worthwhile to look at, especially here in the fourth quarter. This is a great talking point, and I'm sure if your company does business in Romania, this will be a question that will come from the executives. So I spent a lot of time on Romania and Syria and dictators, but now let's get into cyber. Deloitte issuing a statement after a ransomware group called Brain Cipher listed Deloitte UK on their Tor website, claiming to obtain over 1 terabyte worth of data. According to Deloitte, they say they're aware of the threat actor's claim. Their investigation indicates that allegations related to a single client system, which is sitting outside of a Deloitte network, meaning this might be a customer system that Deloitte was managing for a customer. Brain Cipher have been around since at least April of this year. They targeted the Indonesian data center, the government Indonesian data center that we talked about back in June here on the show. And so now they're claiming these guys, Deloitte UK, as a victim. We'll get more information as that becomes available. For Blue Yonder, the responsible ransomware gang has officially come forward. They're known as the Termite, and they've officially claimed the responsibility for the Blue Yonder attack. Its list of over 3,000 customers for Blue Yonder include Microsoft, Renault, Bayer, Tesco, Lenovo, DHL, and so many more. Bleeping Computer, I previously heard that Termite was behind the attack, but it couldn't be independently confirmed. They've now listed them on their website, which is how everyone knows that is. Blue Yonder is still working on recovering from it. The threat actors claim to have 680 gigabytes worth of data, like database dumps, email lists for future attacks, documents, reports, insurance documents, and so much more. So we'll see how this one kind of blurs out, keeping in line with that. Now let's move to Salt Typhoon. We have 4 different stories here around China, so stay tuned, buckle in. The battle between the West and China, specifically between the U.S. and the incoming Trump administration and the Chinese dictator Xi Jinping, and the Chinese Communist Party are going to heat up. We're starting to talk about the Salt Typhoon probe that House Chairman is urging telecom companies to cooperate with. There's going to be an independent probe of the breach and vow to push legislation that would confront digital threats posed by Beijing. So telecom, get ready for more and more cybersecurity regulation. The Cyber Safety Review Board will hold its first meeting today on the campaign by Salt Typhoon. The Biden administration said at least 8 telecom companies were hacked according to this latest attack. There's no doubt that a nation-state sponsored intrusion of the scale and sophistication in the ISPs is unprecedented and unnerving, according to Mark Green, the House Homeland Chair. In a statement, Green's also suggested the CSRB and the CISO prioritize timely information sharing with policymakers, as well as the general public and the private sector. And again, a classified hearing last week on Wednesday had Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon and Mark Warner of Virginia. Mark Warner is the current chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee's draft legislation to respond to this activity. The FCC, for their end, which stands for the Federal Communication Commission, Jessica Rosenworcel said on Thursday they're proposing stronger rules requiring telecom operators to secure their networks from intrusion. In response, the measure has 2 parts: a proposed declaratory ruling to clarify telecom operators are legally obliged to secure their networks under Section 105 of the Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement Act. The second, a notice of proposed rulemaking, including an annual certification requirements for telecom providers to maintain cybersecurity risk management plans. None of those will make telecom more secure. All they'll do is add more red tape and cost to business. And ideally, what should be done here is a private-public partnership between CISA and telecoms and the TISAC, the Telecom ISAC, on how to properly secure this, giving them additional tools into some cooperation with the government. Well, if you haven't checked out my Substack, please make sure to do so right now. jamesazar.substack.com. This weekend, I dropped a brand new article called The Business of Cybersecurity, Why Leaders Must Align Security with Business Processes. It's a great kind of in-depth article with a lot of business lingo to help a lot of us understand how to compare what EBITDA is to cybersecurity and so forth. So go check that out. That's, again, jamesazar.substack.com, and make sure to subscribe wherever you're watching us right now and follow. We continue with China, where a large organization with significant presence in China has been breached by Chinese-based threat actors with network persistence from at least April to August of this year. Semantic threat researchers said the operation appeared to focus on intelligence gathering involving multiple compromised machines and targeting exchange servers, likely for email and data exfiltration. They didn't explicitly name the breached U.S. organization, but the same entity was targeted by China-based Daggerfly threat group back in 2023. Again, we're kind of seeing this take place here, where China is targeting organizations operating within China, and that connection between the Chinese organization to the U.S. organization or the organization abroad. And by the way, as someone who's been in leadership positions where we've had Chinese operations, there's no greater task than trying to separate China from the rest of your infrastructure, as well as data sharing, data hosting, complying with Chinese laws so you don't get your Chinese business in trouble, yet protecting your international IP and protecting your international trade secrets from not being essentially handed to the Chinese by sitting on a server in a server farm somewhere in China. On June 2nd, the threat actors pivoted to another machine. So sorry, let's start this off. The initial intrusion started April 11th, where a suspicious Windows management instrumentation commands and registry jumps were executed. The initial infection vector remained unknown. Symantec was able to observe PowerShell execution, a query, Active Directory for service principal names, and Kerberos tokens, a technique called Kreb roasting. Haha. On June 2nd, the threat actors pivoted to a second machine and used a renamed FileZilla component, likely for data exfil. On that machine, the threat actors used the files ibnetl.6.dll and text input host.dat for persistence. Around the same time, the attackers infected 2 additional machines where they secured persistence through registry manipulation that they used for surveillance and lateral movements. So again, that continues there. But that's not it for China. A Chinese state threat actor is targeting vulnerabilities in messaging apps to deliver spyware in cross-platform devices used by members of an ethnic minority targeted for repression by Beijing. Trend Micro researchers uncovered what they call a threat group called Earth Minotaur, using the Moonshine exploit kit alongside a previously unreported backdoor that enables bad actors to carry out long-term surveillance operation. What are the guys in Canada that are always after NSO? How about you focus on the fact that the Chinese are targeting the Tibetans and Uyghurs community with spyware that they create? Just saying, be nice. Every once in a while, you just kind of a bit unfocused off of NSO and focused on the fact that China is the number one perpetrator of spyware against journalists and minority groups that definitely need some attention in the world. So how about you do that? Scattered Spider, another criminal, has been arrested, this one in Fort Worth, Texas, a 19-year-old hacker by the name of Remington Joy Ogletree. He's accused of phishing operations that ran from October of 2023 to last May. And apparently he hasn't heard the term snitches get stitches because he is singing. According to reports, he's cooperating with the investigation, talking about how they've gained credentials and authorized access to 2 telecom companies, one US-based national bank, how they then stole data, including API keys and crypto, and sold off access to other threat actors on the dark web. So once he was arrested, Ogletree admitted to being part of Scattered Spider. He goes, I know key Scattered Spider members. Any company getting ransomed that's not crypto related, it's going to be them. He went on to tell the FBI that he prefers to target businesses, process outsourcing organizations, because outsourcing companies have less security. Listen to that. Put that in your board right there. I'm gonna highlight it on screen. Put that in your board presentation. Just let it sit there. FBI keeps nabbing members, probably thanks to Ogletree here, with more arrests coming through as it goes on. 8 additional suspects were arrested by the Belgian and Dutch authorities, being suspected in participating in fraud schemes, including phishing, online scam, money laundering, and other illegal activities. According to Europol, the cybercriminal group caught the attention of Belgian authorities back in 2022. 4 individuals were arrested last week in Belgium for their suspected roles in the illicit operation. The 4 others, 3 men and a woman, were arrested in the Netherlands. While still a suspect, the woman was released from custody. And so there's that. And finally, if you missed this weekend's article about Brian Krebs in the Wall Street Journal, do yourself a favor, go read it. Beautifully written about the work Brian Krebs does in our industry and how he's helping so many more. Go check it out. It's a great story. That's it for our show this morning. We'll be back tomorrow, 9 a.m. Eastern, live here with all the latest and greatest. Until then, make sure to subscribe, follow, share, like, comment, and most importantly, y'all, stay cyber safe.
We love feedback, so make sure to connect with us on social media and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast listening platform.